of your identity. You know, this person that you loved for either somebody like a parent that you've known literally your entire life up until they died, or your partner, your spouse that you built a life and a love together, or a sibling or a friend, that you've always known life with them in it. And that change of them being here to not being here, that doesn't change. You know, that becomes a part of your identity now. Did you have any other,
I was just going to share a thought.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that strikes me is if you're grieving and depressed, there are probably very few people that you can really connect with and understand where you are, and to be able to be with you and to help you down the road and the journey you're on. And there'll be a lot of other people that want to be helpful but don't know how. And I guess I just encourage patience with those that are trying but don't know how. And see if you can really find the one or two people in your life that can really be supportive in a way that fits where you are and who you are.
I guess the person I'm thinking of thinks that they know the right way to do everything. And like they never have a spouse, have never had children, so they don't understand any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're trying in their own ways.
No, they just run their mouth.
Yeah, they do.
They know it all.
I'm trying to give them credit for trying.
Thank you, Bob.
You bet.
Were there any other questions or anything before I started talking about the myths of grief?
What are some good things that you can, or helpful things that you can say to someone?
I
I don't like when people say that it's a blessing or they're in a better place. I don't like all those either.
Yeah.
And that's not what I say to anybody.
Yeah.
But are there any other helpful comments or connections you can?
Typically, what I would respond to that, and I'll open that to the group if they have any suggestions too. But I usually say, I don't have any idea how this feels for you right now, but what can I do? Because I don't.
Right.
I don't have, I don't have a spouse, I don't have children, you know, like I said, my cat was my most recent loss, and even though that was a really big deal to me, I know that that's not the same for everybody else. Did anybody else have any suggestions of what they thought maybe a good thing to say? Jen?
I compliment what you just said. The only other thing I might be able to add to that is if you know this person very well, and if you know that there's something that they enjoy, whether it's maybe going out to lunch or going to a movie, say, you know what, I'd like to, when things are at the right time for you and I to go to the movies. Because what I have found, and I continue to hear, when someone has, for example, lost a loved one, that right after that, there's a lot of energy and focus to help that person or that family. But then all of a sudden, it stops.
Yeah.
And that's when you should not stop. That's when you pick up the phone and say, I mentioned something about going to a movie. Would you like to go to a movie? Because so often we don't know what to do or what to say, so we do nothing. Doing nothing is never the best thing to do. It might be just taking a flower or an herb or something and putting it on their front porch and putting a note that said, thinking about you. You just leave it. That would mean more to somebody than you could ever imagine, because there's an element of emptiness and possibly loneliness in the thought that someone cared enough to send a card or just to recognize them means an awful lot. Here's what I say. how would you like to be treated? That's probably the question I've got for anybody. How do you want me to help you? Make them give you something, an answer. Sometimes it could be, would it be okay if I bring a covered dish by? Could I mow your grass? Means a lot.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, when you talk about that support that seems to be there for like really consistent and then drops off, I think it's typically, that's about 2 months after a loss, and we call that time when the casseroles stop coming. I mean, that's, for me, when I send out, I don't only just meet with people if they want me to in bereavement, but I also send letters every few months to check in with them. And one of the first letters that I send, it might be just a month after, just to say, hey, by the way, I'm still here if you should ever want me to. Come by and talk with you. And then the next letter comes at 3 months after a loss. Because that's when, you know, suddenly, even though there was a lot of support there, and the support is still probably there, it's just they're not doing a lot of the actions that they were before, because they feel like maybe you're okay now. But moving back to what I was going to say about myths about grief, one of the ones that actually like really gets under my skin is that it takes a year to get over grief, or that the first year is the hardest and every year after that is going to be hard. More on that in a second. That you should or should not be crying, going out, staying in, talking about it, not talking about it, that you have to follow any particular rules of grief, of grieving to go through, and hearing that you'll get over it, or that grieving before that death or loss happens makes it easier afterwards. So facts about grief, there's no timeline. There's really not. For me, the way that, what I think when I hear that you'll get over it in a year, or that the first year is the hardest and it'll be fine afterwards, is that, you know, that relationship apparently didn't resonate with you very much if it only took a year to get over somebody that maybe was in your life for decades. I mean, that shows how important that relationship was if you are still having a hard time the time afterwards. Grief is different for everybody, and it is based off of the relationship that you have. So your relationship with your mother and losing your mother, your relationship with your spouse and losing your spouse, those griefs they're not gonna look the same, because it was a totally different relationship and a totally different time together. The only way to get through grief is to go through it. You can't avoid it, you can't take shortcuts, and you certainly can try to hibernate, just like what I was saying earlier about that inhibited grief, and try to protect yourself from it. But it's going to come to you no matter what, one way or another. Grief isn't a linear thing. It's not as though you start off in a low point in your life and then you just get up and over the hump and you're up here and you're doing well. You don't get over grief because it's not the cold. It's not a common cold. It is a part of you. Because you can't reverse a death. It's permanent. And so that loss and your grief is permanent too. The goal for grieving, though, is to get to a point where you have less instances of those really painful thoughts, or maybe some episodes of tearfulness that you might feel embarrassed about, even though it's totally normal and expected and okay to be tearful when you lose somebody. And this is a major change. There's even an argument that grief and losing somebody from, like losing a loved one to death, is a trauma, because it is something you wake up one day and it wasn't like, your life wasn't like the day it was before. I have heard people explain to me that losing their spouse felt like losing an arm, felt like losing a part of your body, because they were a part of you for so long. So how do you cope with this? And so want to hear from you all how you've been coping, because I do think that loss affects everybody. But, you know, I have some suggestions, but I want to hear what you've been doing to cope yourself. Yes, Don?
I've probably gone overboard with hobbies and just immersed myself in project after project. And it keeps my mind off of my loss.
Yeah. Thank you. Jen?
I actually, you know, you have a void and you have to have somebody to fill that void. So from my perspective, my daughter was like 5 when he passed away, so never get over it. The way it is today and the way it is tomorrow could be very different, and you hope that it is. So,
Yeah, I couldn't find an actual source to this quote, but you all know the actor Keanu Reeves. He's had a lot of loss in his life. If you remember, he had his girlfriend who died in a car accident, and before that, she had actually had a miscarriage. But I believe that a quote from him, like I said, I can't find it for sure anywhere, but I've heard him say, "Grief never dies, but it changes shape."